I'm really pleased tonight to introduce an excellent panel of two in-person speakers and two online speakers. I will, of course, introduce our chair for the evening, Professor Erin McCandless, who I should introduce well because she is my boss. Professor McCandless serves as the director of the Qatar South Africa Center for Peace and Intercultural Understanding and is a professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. With 3 decades of academic and practical experience across 25 countries, her research explores rising complexity in conflict and crisis contexts, emerging and non-Western actors in mediation and sustaining peace, principled movements for a just international order, and the humanitarian development, peace, and climate nexus. And with that, I'm really pleased to hand over to our very capable chair, who's going to walk us through, I think, a really enlightening session. I should announce that there is a video being taken. We will, if anyone would prefer to not be seen in that, to please let, who is the person who they must let know? Yvonne, yes, or me, for that matter. You're welcome, of course, to record things, post about the event, and just generally sort of, take a record of what you believe is important. In terms of housekeeping, are there any housekeeping requirements that I should make people aware of? Fire exits? Anyway, you're not here to listen to me, so with that, I will very happily hand over to Prof. Erin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abdullah, and it's a great honor to moderate this session with such an amazing, powerful group, panel of experts. And also, thank you, Abdullah. It's also a real blessing to have you with us. Yeah. Okay. So I think we are all aware that we're meeting at a really crucial time for the ceasefire that has quieted some guns, but clearly not solved the problems. And there's, as we're no doubt all aware, the situation is very, very far from resolved. And the current day-after plans are the subject of intensive debate, as we know, while the framework presented, the 20-point peace plan, leaves a tremendous amount to be determined and desired if the goal is a transformative, sustainable peace. But I know our speakers are going to get deeply into this with lots of expertise, so I'm not going to take any more time just now. But I am going to introduce the panels. So first we're going to have Dr. Ramzy Baroud, and he's a US-Palestinian journalist, media consultant, author, and internationally syndicated columnist. He's the editor of a remarkable number of prestigious media platforms. He's been he is the editor of the Palestinian Chronicle, former managing editor of the London-based Middle East Eye, former editor-in-chief of the Brunei Times, and former deputy managing editor of Al Jazeera Online. And he has his PhD from the University of Exeter and is a senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs. And he's going to be looking tonight at the centrality of Gaza in Palestinian history and the history of Palestinian resistance. And then we're going to turn to Dr. Nadia Naser-Najjab, and she is a senior lecturer in Palestine Studies, European Center for Palestine Studies, Institute of Arabic and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. And I think we have University of Exeter seems to be taking over a lot of this space in good ways, huh? She also has her PhD from Middle East Studies, University of Exeter. And she previously served as assistant professor in Birzeit University and in the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies and the MA program in Arab Contemporary Studies in the West Bank. And she's going to look at how the Trump plan contains unmistakable efforts to reshape Palestinian identity and resistance. And then last but certainly not least, we will have Naeem Jannah sitting here next to me. And he's a senior researcher at Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, which many of us know as MISTRA. He's also the executive director of the Afro-Middle East Center, AMEC, which we have featured here. and deputy chair of the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute, and also a research associate with our University of Johannesburg's Department of Politics and International Relations. And he also has a master's degree from University of Witwatersrand, where he also lectured in political studies. And he's going to treat us to a geopolitical analysis of the current moment, the ceasefire itself, what it says about the balance of forces, regarding Palestine, the regional dynamics with the involvement of Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, etc., and the global scene, including what Trump wants. Are you going to be able to know that for sure? Okay. And other big players like Russia and China. So each speaker will have 10 minutes, and before the discussion, I may pose a few questions before I turn it over to you. So thank you so much. And with no further ado, we will turn to Dr. Baroud.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good evening. Hello, everyone. Okay. Thank you very much for the kind invitation and for holding this important meeting. A great honor always to be speaking to an audience in South Africa, but also to be joined, or to rather join, such distinguished speakers and dear friends as well. Let me just start by challenging the notion that Israel is carrying out this genocide in Gaza, this ongoing genocide in Gaza, because Israel's is approaching this from a position of power. I mean, when you undergo such a massive operation of destroying the entirety of a region like Gaza, one of the most populated places and regions on earth, about 2.3 million people, or however number remains in Gaza at the moment, and also killing, maiming, wounding a large section of the population, the number of which is also yet to be determined. But we know for a fact that at least 250,000 people have already been killed, wounded, or maimed in the war. That, yes, it reflects Israel's brutality, but also to some extent Israel's power. I disagree with that notion. Yes, of course, the brutality element, the insanity of the use of firepower against the civilian population. And yes, may I contend this is one of the worst cases of genocides ever recorded, in the sense that those who are the victims of the genocides have no defenders. I mean, yes, we speak of civil society, we speak of many courageous individuals, and even to some extent governments that have taken, including, in fact, starting with the South Africa government, that have taken real, tangible steps to hold Israel accountable. But at the end of the day, no one entered Gaza to defend the Palestinians. No army, no air force. No one could feed a single Palestinian child without Israel's permission. And to be entrapped in that cycle of mad violence for 2 years and counting, and yet nobody still is yet to come to the rescue. And even worse, the potential allies, the brethren of the Arabs and the Muslims, are not only not doing anything, but they are actively conspiring with Israel against the Palestinians. It is something that I don't think there are many episodes in history that can be compared to this. But on the other hand, it's also indicative of Israel's failure. Israel has failed. Often this is attributed to what happened on October 7. Israel has failed to prevent October 7 from happening. But I would even go further. And I would say October 7 itself is the outcome of a succession of Israeli failures that's been going on for such a long time. Israel set out to destroy the Palestinian cause and to erase the Palestinian people. And they did everything in their power to ensure total and utter dominance over the Palestinians. I lived in Gaza. I was born and raised in Gaza. And I used to have in my pocket about 5, 6 different type of IDs. The red ID, which allowed me that's the basic. Everybody has to have that. But then you have the green one that would allow you to move from one area to the other, and the blue one that would allow you to leave the air's checkpoint, and another color that would allow you to stay in the West Bank, and so forth and so on. IDs after IDs after IDs, and every ID means a checkpoint, every ID means a different layer of military administration, and so forth and so on. And yet at the same time, all of these layers and layers, this apparatus of control, to the point that we were taxed for the air that we breathe. I'm not joking. We were actually taxed for the air we breathe. They called it ضريبة الحياة, life insurance. Basically, a soldier would stop you in the middle of Gaza and demand a large number of shekels. And they say, what is that? And he would say, ضريبة حياة, life tax. And yet, despite all of this, neither did they manage to suppress the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Neither they managed to erase in us our sense of peoplehood. Despite the disconnection between the West and Gaza, the West Bank and Gaza, they never managed to break our sense of social and communal connections. Despite of their vastly superior military power, they did not manage to crush our resistance. To the contrary, the resistance continued to develop and evolve over the years. So everything that Israel has done in Gaza in the last 2 years, yes, carries political meaning and deep geopolitical struggles and attempt at coercing some sort of a change in the Middle East, this so-called new Middle East that they have been vying to achieve for such a long time, and they have failed time and again. Yes, all of this, but also part of this is psychological. And the psychological element is very, very clear. I think the best person who kind of demonstrated that is Moshe Feiglin, a former minister and the former leader of the Likud, I think the former speaker of the Knesset, if I remember correctly, when he told an Israeli channel that what worries me most about what happened on October 7 is that the Palestinians are, or rather the Muslims, believe it or not, the Muslims are not afraid of us anymore. The psychological element is very important. And it's not just linked to the right wing in Israel. It is also linked to all Israelis. We also remember what happened in 2008, 2009. I think she was the acting prime minister, Tzipi Livni, when she explained the killing of thousands of innocent people in Gaza, mostly children and women, but at a smaller scale, but still thousands of people killed and tens of thousands injured, maimed, arrested, and so forth. And she said, we just want to know, we want them to know that if Israel is being attacked, we go wild, we go crazy. This is the term that she used, we go wild. There's a psychology behind all of this. And the psychology is that if you try to break us, we will break you, and we will break you to 1,000, if not to 1,000,000 pieces. We will shatter you as a society. We will destroy your mosque. I mean, this is also important. The targeting of the mosque. Gaza has about 1,200 mosques. All of them have been destroyed. It has 3 churches. They have been destroyed. They went after theaters, after studios, after, of course, all the universities, the schools. So it's not just an attempt at destroying Gaza, but it was a systematic destruction of everything that resembles a society. And yet, despite all of this, they have failed. And they have failed because they don't know, they don't understand history. They know how to manipulate history. They don't understand history. And what I mean by that is that, for example, they think that because we do have a culture that honors women and is extremely protective of women, they understood that raping women in broad daylight is going to break that society because of the centrality of our sisters and our mothers and our daughters in our lives. It's going to bring shame, and the shame is going to be our breaking point. That didn't happen. And they tried every other technique, targeting the children. Just in the last attack alone, over 100 Palestinians were killed in Gaza in response to an event that most likely was invented by Netanyahu. There's no demonstration that any Israeli soldier was targeted anywhere in Gaza. They went and they killed over 100 Palestinians. 110, I think, was the final number. And that includes something like 42 children, 20 women. They go after the children, not because they are haphazard in the way they bomb. They know exactly what they are doing. They are using AI. They use artificial intelligence to identify. They know exactly what they are doing. So this whole notion that they are targeting children just because they are bombing haphazardly. No, they are targeting children because they are targeting children. They target women because they target women. They target journalists and doctors and imams and babies. They know exactly what they're doing, and they are doing this for a pre-calculated reason, which is the attempt to break the spirit of Gaza. But somehow that spirit is not broken. And that's really what I would like to talk about, however, briefly today. Why is the Gaza spirit not broken? And how did we miscalculate Gaza, misunderstood Gaza, even in the way we understand and study Palestine academically, even among sympathetic academics and writers and researchers? We have historically neglected Gaza. When I wrote my first book on Gaza, my father was a freedom fighter, Gaza's Untold Story. There was not many resources in English. I had to resort to many to books in Arabic and that sort of thing, because there was not much written about Gaza in English. And perhaps the reason is that we have decided, well, since we are dealing with a settler colonial model, and Gaza is a very tiny little space, about 360 square kilometers, 181 square miles, that's just not significant enough to be discussed within a settler colonial model. Gaza doesn't have much natural resources like the water of the West Bank, among other natural resources. Therefore, Gaza is negligible in terms of the focus of most of the studies done on Palestine. But what we forgot is that according to Palestinian history, we have elements that are not measurable according to, that would fit any rational geopolitical study or a geopolitical analysis. Gaza is poor. The vast majority of the population of Gaza, about 80%, are refugees. Israel has experimented with them. They have been counting calories on them. They have used them as an example of the bad Palestinian who doesn't behave himself, and therefore they have the stick while the carrot is going to Ramallah and the followers of the Palestinian Authority. If you misbehave, your fate is going to be like that of Gaza. And they have carried mini Gazas throughout the West Bank, Jenin, Balata, throughout Nablus, mostly in the northern West Bank, a reminder of what would happen to them if they rebel the way that the Palestinians in Gaza have. But most of these analyses and most of these studies discount the fact that for us Palestinians, concepts like karama, dignity, hurriya, freedom, muqawama, resistance, all of these are actual measurable elements that gives us the kind of agency that would allow us to do what we do. We don't think about it this way. Look at any social media platform right now. You're going to find out that Gaza somehow is celebrating a victory against Israel. That they are living in tents, they are praying near on top of their houses of worship with a great deal of spirit and determination, great deal of hope. Where does this come from? It's irrational when you think about it. How do you explain to the woman who lost everyone and everything, and several women in my family have, in fact, there's whole branches of my family are gone. There's a particular woman, I don't want to mention her name, is quite unique, and the Israelis pretty much killed every single person in her family. And I told her once to condole her for the killing of the last of her children, after her husband and all of her children, including her babies, were killed. And she said, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah for everything, whatever God gives us is sweet, and it's God has chosen them to be in paradise. And I'm familiar with that language. I've heard it from so many other members and friends, members of my family, but also friends and neighbors in Gaza. But then the explanation was, but then at the end she said, I really do need to go because I have an Arabic lesson I need to teach. And it turned out that this cousin of mine teaches Arabic in a tent to a group of children that she has done every single day, even as she buried her children. How do you measure this? How do you explain this to a BBC analyst or to a Western academic? What paradigm, what model does this fit into? This is why I have focused my studies for a long time on people's history, not because I figured it out more than anybody else, but because I feel that a deeper understanding of what's happening in Gaza in particular, but also throughout Palestine, since it cannot be explained in supposedly the traditional method of explaining history or understanding history, we have to find another way of understanding why Gaza is Gaza and what keeps Gaza going despite of the utter and total annihilation of the Gaza Strip right now. So the point here I'm trying to make is that resistance in Palestinian culture is a thing, is a value, is not a sentiment, is not an emotion, it's not something we chant in protest, but something that we experience and practice every single day. And resistance is not a Kalashnikov, and it's not firing in the airs and not guns and bullets. This is just one of numerous manifestations of resistance. It's, in fact, in some way, it's the least important from a day-to-day life in Palestine. It becomes critical during certain times. Without resistance in Gaza in the last 2 years, we wouldn't be having this conversation we are having right now. It would be an entirely different conversation. It will be a conversation about what are we going to do with the 2 million Palestinians in the Sinai desert right now. Let's be honest with one another about this point. It would be something about why is Israel building settlements and how can we expose the Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip at the moment. That's because of the resistance in Gaza, but the every day-to-day resistance in Gaza is not that. It is the community of Gaza that somehow always create and find new meanings in order for them to continue with this journey, to continue fighting for their survival, but to also continue to serve as the first and at times, sadly, the last line of defense against racism, apartheid, and Zionism as well. In order for us to understand, to then appreciate Gaza in a proper way, we need to quit thinking of Gaza as a place that, or as an event that the scope of which, the timing of which, the nature of which can only be determined by Israel. Israel decides to kill Palestinians, let's talk about Gaza. Israel ceases the killing of Palestinians, or at least slows down the rate of the killings, then we stop talking about Gaza. But we need to be talking about Gaza every single day. And we need to understand that the agency is the reason that prevented Israel from carrying out its plans and schemes in Gaza, which ultimately means we need to have a completely different type of conversation in which Gaza needs to become the epicenter of Palestinian history because of the resistance of the people of Gaza. That resistance that goes back generations, by the way. I mean, almost immediately after the Nakba, Gaza began resisting. Immediately. The Fidaiyin movement was made mostly of Fallahin. They were illiterate peasants. They had no ideology per se. They had no complex political view, and they did not know what the heck geopolitics actually means. They were just ordinary people who have been deprived of everything and exiled, and then they started developing terms like, or rather infusing terms like karama. Karama, our dignity, that was so important. If you look at early Palestinian writing, from that period, you will find that the word dignity was mentioned numerous times. That was the ideology, their dignity, their honor, their self-respect, their homeland, their harvest, their children, their future, their religion, their God, their spirituality. And that evolved over time to carry ideological meanings at times, but it was essentially the same idea, just being renewed generation after generation. Those who tell you that the issue has something to do with Hamas, of course, it's completely wrong. Hamas was established in 1987. Gaza has been resisting, and all of Palestine, since 1948, and even before that date. They tell you this is an issue of Islamic fundamentalism. Well, guess what? The leaders of the resistance in Gaza in the 60s and 70s were the socialists.
Dr. Baroud, can I just ask
primarily
you to...
the communists and then the PFLP. So the issue here is not that of Hamas, is not that of religion. It is that of a settler colonial state that can only be sustained through violence. They cannot, and that is a sign of weakness. And that's what I started talking about, is that this is not an expression of power, it's an expression of weakness. Because typical regimes in Israel's situation, they would like to control the masses and the population, yes, through violent means, but also through cultural hegemony and through other means. And they have utterly failed with the Palestinians, especially those in Gaza.
Thank you.
But on the other hand, they try to deprive the Palestinians.
Sorry. Can I just ask you to try and conclude, give some concluding
remarks?
Yes,
we'll do so. But they also tried their very best to deprive Palestinians of their agency, and they also failed. So this is a story of resistance, but also a story of agency, and a story of a place that is one of the smallest regions in the Middle East, yet somehow it's a region that ended up redefining the entire politics of the whole region and of the entire Middle East. A small region that managed to reimpose the Palestinian struggle as that of urgency that needs to be dealt with without Trump's normalizations, without the nonsensical talks about Palestinians needing to put up or shut up, and that sort of thing. So let's appreciate Gaza in a different, according to a different model, not that just of being victims, but that of being an empowered nation that is fighting under the harshest of circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So many riveting comments there. And I know you're not feeling so well. Will you be staying with us? Or would you like to take a quick question now?
For me, if you don't mind, just because I don't feel very well.
Yes.
If I can take a quick question.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one question. The conceptualization of resistance was so, rich. And it got me thinking about resistance as a mobilizing and cohering kind of practice amongst Palestinians. And I'm just wondering if you could reflect for a minute on what that would look like, assuming there is going to be peace. So how could that resistance potentially be utilized and or transformed? Or how does it, it probably is very instrumental for nation building, state building, but maybe you could just say a few words on that. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly, but I mean, resistance, as I said, have been manifested in Palestinian culture since the very, very start, and will continue to be the case until Palestine is free. Nation building and the like is a process that can only start after the dismantling of the settler colonial apartheid regime. I think the Palestinian people, it's only really because when you think about it, Palestinian resistance it's only a reaction to something that has happened prior to it. There's no such thing as haphazard Palestinian violence for no reason. Historically, we are not known for that. So the whole idea of let's dismantle the resistance and disarm this group or that group, and for the resistance to give up its weapons is total nonsensical gibberish. That is not only it will not happen, there is no reason for it to happen in the first place. But now you already see in Gaza, despite of the precarious ceasefire that is interrupted by massacres every few hours, the fact is Palestinians are in the streets, opening their streets, clearing the rubble. Some of them are already crushing the destroyed concrete to rebuild some of the houses. They are trying to ensure that the survival of everybody, that everybody has access to food, to water. I mean, these are all acts of resistance. And it's just all about the conversion of that energy that existed throughout the 2 years to some process of recoping and hopefully recovering completely at one point in the future. So once that settler colonial regime is dismantled, then Zionism is defeated. And this is really the only way that we can move forward, not just in Palestine, but in the Middle East. There will be that, obviously, that process of converting the energy, this power of the resistance that exists in the heart of every Palestinian in Gaza, in the West Bank and beyond. We're going to see that being converted into a process of rebuilding Palestine and kind of taking charge of our destiny the way we should have had the opportunity to do so from the very start.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's exactly what I was contemplating, and I think you framed it extremely well. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn to Dr. Naser-Najjab.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really, thank you for organizing this timely event. Thank you, Abdullah, for inviting me. You're really missed here in Exeter, I must tell you. And thank you all for attending. Okay, so this is a powerful presentation by Ramzy, really. What I will talk about is that Israel employs not only hard power, but also soft power, and in cooperation with US in particular, and to a certain extent with the EU. So when we examine a Trump plan for Gaza, the so-called Trump plan, the broader context of Western-sponsored peace agreements, there are some recurring characteristics emerge, like ambiguity, interim, delaying tactic, and elements of secrecy, of course. Now, despite these elements, certain demands within these peace agreements remain unmistakably clear. Now, within the Trump plan, there are two articles in particular that I'd like to refer to. And the underlying aim of these articles really to suppress Palestinian narrative and resistance. So Article 13 declares, and I'm quoting, "A new Gaza will be fully committed to building prosperous economy and to peaceful coexistence with their neighbors." Article 18 outlines, and this is a quote, "an interfaith dialogue process based on values of tolerance and peace coexistence to try and change the mindsets and narratives of Palestinians and Israelis by emphasizing benefits that can be derived from peace." Mentioning Israeli here is only Israelis is only symbolic, as I shall show. Now, it's framed in the language of reconciliation. These provisions deny Palestinians, which Ramzy talked about, agency to define their own future. They are not consulted on these. And therefore, coexistence with Israel is not presented as an outcome of justice. It's rather imposed as a condition for participation. It is similar to, probably you recall, the Peace to Prosperity Plan 2020. Also, it included an article or a section, and I'm quoting, where it states, "It is very important that education focuses on peace to ensure that future generations are committed to peace, within the goal of creating an environment that embraces the values of coexistence and mutual respect through the region." Central to these plans is conditional framework, which Aaron you just asked about, by the way. All peace agreements and foreign aid are explicitly tied to reform in Palestinian education. It's not only education, but I'm going to focus on education in particular. But funding is conditional to the Palestinians since Oslo Agreement. So this strategy is not new, by the way. During, for example, in 2000, this is what Hillary Clinton stated or declared. All future Palestinian Authority must be echoed by
Maybe you
institutions.
can you kindly go back to the Hillary Clinton quote? That's where you broke.
Oh, read it again. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. She declared in 2000, Hillary Clinton. This was, by the way, during her first Senate campaign. Okay, she said, all future aid to the Palestinian Authority must be contingent on strict compliance with their obligation to change all textbooks in all grades, not just 2 at a time. End of quote. Good? Clear? Okay, so these demands have been echoed by institutions. For example, and this will explain the meaning of changing text curriculum for Palestinians. For example, an organization like Israeli Palestinian Center for Research and Information, IPICRI, it's called. It was integrated into the second track diplomacy introduced in Oslo Agreement, known as People to People program. And this shows how discourses of peace and reconciliation have been mobilized to suppress Palestinian narrative and resistance. So in 2000, the US Consulate General in Jerusalem tasked IPICRI with evaluating textbooks, both Palestinians and Israeli textbooks, to ensure that they promote peace and pluralism. So IPICRI submitted reports between 2000 and 2005 to the consulate. But in this report, it's not clear whether IPICRI submitted the reports on the Israeli textbooks. That's one thing. Second, IPICRI claimed that the book selection was random from both. However, in the process, what I read, it was biased. It failed, for example, IPICRI to justify the selection of only for Israeli textbooks, only from grade 1 to 8. However, textbooks across multiple grades of Palestinian textbooks were scrutinized and evaluated. So in their reports, they failed to establish a clear instances of incitement or religious hatred in Palestinian textbooks. Yes, yet the reports criticized Palestinian textbooks for lacking enough enthusiasm for peace process. The reports on Israeli curricula were justified or positively interpreted every negative portrayal of Palestinians. Yani, one example is that they found something that Palestinians portrayed negatively. And I'm quoting from their report. Possibly there is an expectation that the teacher will do this, yani will act this negative portrayal as the workbook is designed to be used as a basis for a guided discussion by the teacher in the classroom. The absence in Israeli textbooks, the absence of Palestinian nationality identity was explained by claiming that these textbooks do not cover relevant period, for example. And no recommendations were made for curricular change for Israeli textbooks. Meanwhile, the report criticized Palestinian national education for grade 4, for example, for omitting Jewish historical presence in the region, grade 4. But they thought that for Jewish students, it's too complicated. And they did not explain why it's not too complicated for Palestinians. Epicry also accused Palestinian textbooks of incitement for referencing places in 1948 in Palestine and focusing on Palestinian history. So, I mean, the students, they are grandchildren of Palestinians who were expelled from cities in 1948. Anyway, so we don't know two things: whether the report on textbooks was submitted to US consulate, and second, the committee that reviewed the books, we don't know whether a Palestinian was sitting in that committee. I couldn't find out. They just mentioned Israeli experts in the committee. Anyway, recently, although at the beginning the EU defended Palestinian textbooks that does not incite hatred or violence, later on changed. In 2021, EU report accused Palestinian curricula of incitement and anti-Semitism. Now, although people-to-people itself, this second track diplomacy, I myself was involved in it and I wrote a book about it, it failed because Palestinians did not want to engage with Israelis yet on issues related to coexistence. They wanted Israelis to change public opinion and put pressure on the Israeli government to end the occupation and to end the colonization of the land. Despite that people-to-people failed, there was a revival of people-to-people in 2020. It was an act, submitted by Netanyahu and passed by the Congress. And the bill allocated, imagine, 250 million over 5 years. This program, or the decision to revive it, did not consult Palestinians. They just took the decision to do it. I don't know, I think they are active with few Palestinians who participate in it, but in general, Palestinians refuse to participate in such encounters. So as a result, peace proposals always targeted Palestinian education. Why I mention that? Because in Trump's plan, although the Palestinian Authority is not mentioned as an active participant, only mentioned that it will be involved in the plan after doing this reform, which is the reform of the curricula. So immediately, unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority, as early as 30th of September, pledged to change all Palestinian textbooks. And I think they have started. And this, although also it's interesting because the plan does not mention the West Bank, and it was only Gaza. It's mentioned only about changing the curriculum. So, and I must also mention that this change of curriculum is extended to countries participated in normalization and normalization partners such as Saudi Arabia. They also wanted them to change the curriculum. So this is not a US demand. It's not only a US demand. This is a demand, an Israeli demand. In November, I think November 2023, here's what Netanyahu stated. We have to demilitarize Gaza after the destruction of Hamas. We have to de-radicalize Gaza, and that will take some time, especially work on mosques and on schools. And then we have to rebuild Gaza. I wanted to end by a recent incident in the West Bank, because I know that Ramzy focused on Gaza, but the West Bank is experiencing a massive colonization, unprecedented at present time. Between Smotrich and Ben Gvir, Palestinians during now the olives harvest, they are subject to attacks, uprooting trees. The colors Ramzy mentioned in Gaza, there are gates with colors encircling Palestinian, with settlements at probably every entrance of Palestinian villages. Massive confiscation of land. So recently, and with this I will end, a Palestinian journalist reflecting on a moment soldiers shot and critically injured his nephew. That was October 26th. Here's what he said. Many parties, and I'm quoting him by the way, he said, many parties continue to pressure the Palestinian Authority to revise school curricula and remove what they label as incitement. But even with the finest, most peaceful curricula in the world were combined, they could never erase this image from the memory of this child, nor from the children of his neighborhood, his school, and his town. The soldiers, the tanks, and the military checkpoints are the real curriculum for generations growing up in this land. End of quote. So I think the approach is to reframe education is not a space for liberation or historical reckoning, but as a mechanism of control. It treats Palestinian memory, resistance, identity as threats to be neutralized while entrenching colonial logics under the guise of peace building. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we're going to get a lot of important questions coming to you from that very rich presentation. I know it raises a lot for me as a peace researcher, but in particular, the ways in which peace is conflated with a very bland notion of peace, right? And even coexistence, many would say, is not actually peace. It's an extremely negative form of peace. And to reach any kind of higher level quality of relationships, there has to be justice. But I look forward to chatting with you more in the Q&A. Okay, please, Naeem.
Thank you, Erin. Erin told me I have 10 minutes to speak, so I looked for the smallest piece of paper I could to write my speech, but all I could fit was headlines or subheadings, so I'm going to go through subheadings. Firstly, of course, the topic for this evening is a bit off. There isn't a ceasefire in Gaza. Up to yesterday morning, more than 100, about 105 or so people in Gaza had been killed by Israel since the beginning of the ceasefire, so-called. Last night, about 120 people were killed. And all of these, the more than 200, all of them civilians. People killed in their tents, people killed in their cars, etc., etc. So there isn't really a ceasefire. Looked at it from that perspective, one wonders why the Palestinian resistance insists that they maintain the ceasefire. But we'll come to that. Let me just say that Gaza, and particularly Gaza in the past 2 years, and Palestine more generally, has become, in a sense, a lodestar for the future, a reference point for what the future is going to look like in various kinds of ways. First, let me just say about Gaza, the term Gaza Strip, which we often use, is an Israeli imposed term. Before the Israeli occupation, there wasn't a Gaza Strip. There was Gaza City, just Gaza as it was called, and all of the little towns and villages around it. And so when we use the term Gaza Strip, we use it with some caution. Those towns and villages, of course, include the village that now sits beneath what Kibbutz Be'eri, for example, the name that I'm sure you all remember from October 7th. Kibbutz Be'eri was built on a Palestinian village. So some of those fighters that went into Be'eri actually were going home. Because many of the people from Gaza, many of the refugees from Gaza, through the fence are able to see where their homes were. But when I say that Gaza is a lodestar reference point for the future, a few things that I just want to mention here. Number one is that, firstly, is that in some ways what we are seeing taking place in the Palestinian context is a kind of classical anti-colonial struggle, but also very new forms of anti-colonial struggle. For those who thought that those kinds of struggles were over from the mid-20th century with all of the so-called independence processes that took place, it's not over. Colonization is not over, even in its brutal and obvious form. There's Palestine, Western Sahara, that we can refer to. And so what Palestinians have been telling us, certainly in the past 2 years, is that process is not yet over. The process of decolonization is not yet over. And if the process of decolonization is not over, then the process of anti-colonial struggle in all its forms is not over. And there's international law around anti-colonial struggles. UN resolutions that legitimize anti-colonial struggles. Some of them say by any means necessary. Some of them say even with armed resistance. And so all of the resistance we're seeing is not just legitimized, but is a right under international law. And Palestinians over the past 2 years in particular, people in Gaza, have been reminding us of that. It has also October 7th was in a sense the beginning of a process of redefining global geopolitics and sharpening points of tension, sharpening the kind of dividing line, particularly between the global north and the global south. The South African case at the ICJ helped that process along. And so you saw that many global South states lined up behind South Africa in that case and in other cases subsequently. But that dividing line has become a sharper one. And all because of what has happened in Gaza in the past 2 years. A dividing line that people in the global South are pointing to, particularly in terms of international law. That it is clear now that international law has never been meant for people of the global South, for formerly colonized people. And I mean, this is a fact. International law, the rules of war were developed for Europeans to be able to regulate conflict among themselves. It wasn't meant for us. While they were talking about what the rules of law mean in Europe at the beginning of the 20th century, Germany committed 2 genocides in our neighborhood, in Namibia. And the rules of war and all of that didn't apply because these were not human beings, really speaking, right? You know that the term human rights was introduced into the UN Charter by a South African, Jan Smuts, while he was the leader of an apartheid state even before it was called apartheid. So all of this, the UN Charter, and then from there that term human rights went into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all of that was meant for Europeans. It wasn't meant for us. Over the past 2 years, that idea is being challenged. International law, human rights is being claimed by people of the global South, and all of this from the 7th of October, I think we should point to. There's also for many Palestinians, and in a sense Ramzy kind of alluded to this, there's a re-questioning of the notion of, and for all of us, frankly, the question of who are our people? Who are the people of the Palestinians that they can count on? Arabs? Muslims? Or is it young Jews in the United States? I think that is a question that that we all should be asking ourselves. Is our identity, is our notion of who our people are determined by ethnicity, which is a very Zionist concept, determined by ethnicity, even determined by religion? Or is it determined by values, wherever those values come from? But if you stand for justice, you know, the SAJFP people in this room are more my people than the ruler of the UAE is. We might be co-religionists, but they're not my people, right? And I think that that's something that that has been raised as well. The past 2 years has certainly exposed the role of the Palestinian Authority, this quisling entity whose only role is this very sacred role, in Mahmoud Abbas's words, of security coordination. And as an advert, there's a book out there called Outsourcing Repression, about the role of the Palestinian Authority in repression of Palestinians. But that book was published in 2020, before the past 2 years, where that has become much worse. The PA has been exposed, and now the funding that is being allocated to the PA from the United States and Europe, the funding is basically going to be for security. The funding for other things, for, you know, all these municipal things that the PA does, collecting garbage and stuff, all of that funding is going to be stopped, because there's only one role that the PA can play, and that is to be a security contractor for Israel. That has become clear, and that's become clear in all of those statements. I mean, Nadia mentioned around education, the statements from the PA, but in all kinds of other things. What they did in Jenin against activists there, in Nablus, etc. And so the PA has become completely exposed, even as it tries to claw back some credibility, but is unable to. When the leader of the Fatah organization, who's also, of course, the leader of the PA and also the leader of the PLO and leader of every nursery school and, you know, scout group or whatever, when he says that he does not want Marwan Barghouthi released from prison, someone that's supposed to be from his own organization, and all of those resistance groups in Gaza want him released, I think that says a thing or two. Let me say a word or two about October 7th. The point I want to make about, you know, I don't have enough time to go through it, but one point I want to make about October 7th is that that when we look at the 7th of October operation, when we look in general at Palestinian resistance, and as an aside here, thanks to Ramzy for making this point. You know, there's often, people often say about people in Gaza that they're such a resilient people. Resilience is about being able to adapt to stress that is put on you. And so the challenge from the other side is, how much of stress can we put before it breaks? The people of Gaza are not resilient. They resist. Their living day to day are acts of resistance, not resilience. I think it's an important conceptual difference. But I was saying about the October 7th, that the October 7th operation too often, and even in our circles, is framed from the perspective of the Israelis. And that's why we often end up with conspiracy theories. Oh, Netanyahu knew about it, and he allowed it to happen so that he could conduct a genocide. Oh, Netanyahu knew about it because he was paid, or he knew whatever. We then give no credit to Palestinians and what they did. If you want to know the genius of the Palestinian military operation and intelligence operation on the 7th of October, let's not talk about the 7th of October. Just what has been revealed in the past couple of weeks, okay? You saw the story, I'm sure many of you, of the Qassam Shadow Unit. This is the unit that is, whose sole duty is to look after captives. How they organized demonstration, an anti-Hamas demonstration, in order that they might be able to move the captives from one town to another, to another, to another, in full view of the Israeli drones. One of the captives, and this came out from the Israeli captives, not from Qassam. One of the captives said, they got us to lead the march sitting on their shoulders, and we were shouting anti-Hamas slogans. Okay, what kind of an intelligence and military operation is this? Or the one about all of that money coming into Gaza from the United Arab Emirates in order to fund these gangs that were killing people and stealing the aid. And how Qassam at that time, this operation led by Yahya Sinwar, diverted the funds, ensured that it didn't get to where it was supposed to go, and use it instead for the resistance. I mean, you talk about the UAE, which has such great surveillance, Israeli surveillance equipment, of course, that it is the second most surveilled place in the world after Gaza. Yet they were undermined in this kind of way. The fact that you had on the 7th of October fighters walking around with little maps of the Re'em military base, a map of the inside of the base, marked with where particular officers' rooms were so that they could abduct them. This is a massive intelligence success. So let's look at the 7th of October operation from the perspective of Palestinians rather than Israelis, and talk about what the successes were rather than what the Israeli failures were, which is really quite less than relevant to us. On the so-called ceasefire deal that's supposedly in place at the moment, and the question often gets asked, with what has happened since the ceasefire, and you see that I'm just giving headlines. I'm not giving a coherent speech because, I don't have space or time. The fact that the resistance in Gaza accepted this plan, and the question often gets asked, didn't you know that the Israelis are not going to abide by it? They never abided previously, whether in the past 2 years or even before that, by any such agreement. Why did you think that that they would abide by it now? 200 people killed since the ceasefire came into effect, and no response from the resistance. Well, two things about this. One is that on the ground, if we are to, for a moment, ignore, and I don't say that in the negative way that it sounds, if we are for a moment to ignore the fact that Ramzy said 250,000 Palestinians have been killed, civilians, or some estimates 500,000, etc., just for a moment, set that fact aside. On the ground, the resistance, the Qassam brigades of Hamas, the Al-Aqsa brigades of Fatah, the Quds brigades of Islamic Jihad, the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades of the PFLP and the DFLP, etc., on the ground were winning against the Israeli occupation forces. Their operations, spectacular operations, they were winning. If it was soldier to soldier, they would be winning. And they would stick this fight out until the end, because 2 years later, 2 years into this, with all of the weapons that the Americans could supply, with all the weaponry that the Germans could supply and the British, etc., with all of the weaponry that the Israelis have, with this huge army that it has not been able to subjugate the resistance in Palestine. So they were winning. And they could have won, and particularly you find in areas that were completely depopulated by the Israeli occupation forces. That's where they came into their own, because they didn't have to be concerned about civilian casualties. That is the resistance. So on the ground they were winning, but there's a genocide taking place. About a month ago, there was, Israeli spokesperson say in interviews and that we killed 30,000 Hamas terrorists. Okay. About a month ago, there was a report released by the Israeli Defense Force, as it is called, that gave a precise number of how many fighters were killed up to that point. 8,300 and something. Okay, let's say 9,000 to round it up to the next one. If the number of the total number of people killed is 67,000, then 9,000 makes about 13-14%. If the number is closer to 500,000, then 9,000 is about 1%. So 1% of the people that were killed were actually military people. The rest were civilians, and they were not collateral damage. They were targeted, as Ramzy said. Children targeted, health workers targeted, academics targeted, artists targeted, etc. Right? This was a deliberate kind of genocide against a civilian population. And so the resistance found itself in a position where on the ground, militarily it was winning, but its people were dying around it. And that forced it into a situation where you have to make difficult choices. And these were the choices that had to be made. Moving forward. So the question is, will the so-called ceasefire hold? This is very uncertain, of course. For one thing, the Israelis can decide that the ceasefire is like a light switch. Yes, there's a ceasefire, then they switch the light off, and for 12 hours overnight, there's no ceasefire, and then the next morning they say, yes, there's a ceasefire. And that we can't predict. But more importantly, that the Israelis, the Netanyahu government, was forced into this ceasefire. They don't want a ceasefire, they want to continue with the genocide. And so they manufacture reasons or excuses to be able to do that. As Ramzy said, this notion that there was an Israeli soldier that was attacked, and hence there's no evidence that any soldier was attacked. This thing that Hamas has broken the ceasefire because they're not returning the bodies, right? Well, even the United States, when I say the United States, Trump and his deputy, Vance, have said that these corpses of the captives are in such places that they can't be retrieved immediately, that it requires equipment, etc., in order to be able to retrieve them. Right, but Israel wants to use that as an excuse to continue the genocide. Of course, if the issue of the return of bodies was a deal breaker, well, Israel has not just dead bodies, but live bodies. Thousands of Palestinian captives are still being held in Israeli dungeons. From Gaza alone, about 100 health workers that we know of that were abducted because they're health workers that have not been released. That's apart from all the bodies. And the bodies that have been returned a few days ago, for example, just dumped in Gaza City, mutilated, no identification, clearly tortured, etc. But Palestinians, of course, Palestinian lives and Palestinian bodies don't matter. They're not relevant. You saw that interview, perhaps, of that soldier who was so surprised. He shot a sniper. He shot a little child, and then he was shocked because the child's brother, little child also, came to pull the body away. And he said, like, what is wrong with this guy? So he shot him as well, because what kind of a creature is this that he wants to go? Because he's not human, of course. Only human beings would do something like that, try and reclaim the body of your brother. And then the father came to take the two sons, and he also got shot. Because, of course, why would he do that? He's also not human.
Okay, concluding remarks.
Okay. On the geopolitical front, and I said that Gaza the past 2 years will result in global changes. I mean, we now have a situation where in the region there's great amount of flux. The mediators now, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. Egypt, of course, remains as it always has been. The Egyptian government, still part of Camp David, still the second largest recipient of American aid, and still pro-Israeli, frankly. But the shifting sands in the region are quite significant. The agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, brokered by the Chinese, which still holds. The seizing of the normalization on the 7th of October is still something that is important. And so what we're moving into is a new era where in the region there are new arrangements around security, around politics, around diplomacy, etc. But, and let me end 2 points. But the region is not a region that can rely, and this is another difference with past anti-colonial struggles. The Palestinians have no great powers to rely on. Anyone that thinks Russia is on the Palestinian side is dreaming. Anyone that thinks China is on the Palestinian side is dreaming. Look at the trade relations between those countries and Israel, and political and diplomatic relations. And so the region finds itself on its own. And I think that moving forward, that is going to hold it in good stead with all of those countries that I mentioned. Israel is, as Ramzy said, much weaker than it has been in the past in all kinds of ways, economically, militarily, etc. And last point, that with all of this then, that I've said and the other two speakers have said, what is our role in South Africa? So let me end with these 2 points in terms of what is our role. Number one, the glorious, heroic Palestinian resistance that we know about for the past 8 decades, 9 decades, 10 decades, and that we saw so obviously and so brazenly and heroically in the past 2 years. That resistance deserves our full support in whatever way, whatever that means, but our full support. These are the heroes of the Palestinian people. Yes, Ramzy is correct. Resistance is something that happens every day. But right now, that armed resistance that has held back the 12th or 13th most powerful army in the world for 2 years, supplied by the most powerful militaries in the world, deserves our full support. And secondly, of course, that we need to continue and intensify our efforts at completely isolating the Israeli apartheid genocidal state with boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. Thank you.